Entering the Pat Mayo Experience.
Pat Mayo Experience. Pat Mayo Experience. Pat Mayo Experience. Experience.
Welcome to the Pat Mayo Experience, Week 15 DraftKings picks and preview. If you are looking for the DraftKings cheat sheet, which has been fire, well, at least last week it was. With a lot of people won some GPPs last week. That was fantastic. Hopefully, we can keep this rolling. It only took 14 weeks for good picks to come out. Maybe week 15, we can keep that going just a little bit. That will be released on Thursday. The Carson Wentz news, him not playing this weekend, has been updated in the season-long rankings. You can find all of that up on DKPlaybook.com or in the description of this video. Before we get to our guest, because the Hulkamaniacs demanded Joe Holka be back, so he's going to be on, but I do want to let you know of a few other things, like if you want to get into a draw for 20 DK bucks, smash the like button, leave your DraftKings handle in the comment section, and tell me which quarterback this week on the main slate you think is the best value, because I'm having a real rough time trying to figure out who I want to have as my main quarterback and my two periphery quarterbacks this week. There's a lot of good guys in bad matchups that I really want to go to, but I may not have the guts. So I want to hear what you think. So like, DK handle, favorite value quarterback. Could be the most expensive. If you think he's a good value, could be the cheapest guy. Just want to hear what you have to say. If you leave an audio review, 5 stars, something nice, and your DraftKings handle, you two will also be in the draw for 20 DK dollars. The big thing, and I do need your help for this because I'm going up against like Roto World and ESPN and all this stuff, and it turns out the Pat Mayo Experience does not have the same sort of following. That, if you go to fsta.org/vote video, or just look in the comment section or the description of this video and or podcast, there is a link. If you follow that link, you will be able to vote for best short video of the year in fantasy, and you got to go vote for your man, Pat Mayo, as that comes out. I mean, you can go vote every single day. The more you can vote, the better. You can vote for once per day, or if you go like on different browsers, or you can do it from your phone. As many votes as we can get, I will beg for them. It's the only possible way I have a chance at this, and I would like to win. So please help me out there. Let's get into it. Breaking down the entire DraftKings slate by position, the main slate. It is Joe Holka. You can watch his Twitch channel at twitch.tv/Joe Holka, on YouTube and Twitter /Joe Holka. What's going on, my man?
Not too much. Thanks for having me back, especially after we talked about Matt Lacoste last time. I figured that was the last time I would make it on the show, so I appreciate the second chance.
People demanded that you come back. People love you as a guest, so don't take anything away from yourself. I played Matt Lacoste that week, 0 points. I even doubled down and played Matt Lacoste in some lineups last week. Not a success.
Hey, to be fair, I did say since I think he had a catch in 8 straight games, and I was probably going to be on him, basically locked in a 0. So we did warn you guys even on a Wednesday. So hopefully we can avoid something like that this week.
Well, let's jump into the running back pool for this week. If you go all the way to the top, you're going to see Saquon Barkley coming off a really good half last week, and then he didn't play so much in the second half. He's 94. Zeke is 9,000. Those are the only 2 running backs priced above $7,500 on this main slate. What do we do here? Because I'm just looking at Zeke and thinking he's cheaper and he's in a better spot. Why wouldn't I just play him?
Yeah, I think that I'm definitely going to mess around with roster construction and see what I can do to play both. But if you had to pick one, I think I kind of underestimated the usage for Zeke in the passing game early in the year. Like this kind of screen game that they have going in Dallas is looking pretty elite. Like we saw how many touches he got in the passing game last week, and just watching that game in general, it's pretty evident that he's going to be a big factor in the passing game. 13 targets last week, 12 catches. I mean, he's one of those guys that we can rope in with Christian McCaffrey as someone that has the legitimate chance to hit the double bonus. So love Zeke. He is at Indy, but on the fast track, those games always tend to be a little bit higher paced and higher scoring. I mean, you can project him for probably the most touches out of any running back on the slate, though it is close with Saquon. Probably doing everything I can to play both, but I do like Zeke with the discount, like you mentioned.
In the past 5 games, Zeke hasn't seen fewer than 6 targets in any single one of those contests, and he's averaging around 23 carries per game. If you can just find the end zone, he's going to be a slate breaker. So he's the guy that I'm going to be building around. I played Saquon in every single one of my lineups last week. I'll probably play Zeke in every single one of my lineups this week and figure out the rest as the week unfolds. But that's where I'm settling at right now. I actually think that the Colts can score on the Cowboys. Maybe I'm just delusional, considering the Cowboys so rarely give up points to anyone, can really attack the quarterback. But in Indy, I think it's actually a nice spot, and I would want Indy to keep up on the scoreboard to make Zeke more viable, because we saw with Barkley last week, if he had played in the second half, he may have broken every rushing record.
Oh yeah, both of these guys, like it's really hard to kind of poke holes in them. Even last week, I ended up playing both of them on a pretty running back heavy approach. Like at kind of the halfway point of the morning games, thought I was going to win everything just because I thought it was going to be that massive 250-yard game from Saquon. So that was frustrating to see them sat down. Obviously, we couldn't see that coming, but I think Indy's going to score points too. I'm kind of with you. I think that kind of Dallas has been playing really well. They've been pressuring really well, this defense, but Indy's offensive line has been so solid this year. They have been incredible at home. They're a team I think that's going to be able to pass on Dallas a little bit. So I actually like them to score points for sure. I think that almost helps Zeke a little bit. They are a slight underdog in this game, which always kind of leads me to thinking that Zeke might see a few more targets. And that was the big knock on him before, that he just didn't have this elite passing game usage that guys like CMC, Saquon, Gurley have. And now that he has that, I think it's full steam ahead. Like what he did last week without even scoring a touchdown. I think that the floor and the ceiling for both these guys is just sky high.
And that's why I lean towards him over Saquon if I had to pick between the two. I played a few McCaffrey and Barkley lineups last week. I had no Zeke because I really had to make my choice between those top four guys. I knew I was going with Barkley. And I only played 5 lineups, so I couldn't get into the Kamaras or the Zekes of the world. I stuck with McCaffrey and tried to finish off my build that way. And that was the McCaffrey part wasn't the right move because Zeke would have been the preferred guy because you would have saved a bit of money and he performed just a little bit better. But I'm thinking that this week everyone got stuck in that value running back trap from last week, that there was so much good value that you only used one of the elite guys and double paid down because you could, and it didn't really work out. Do you think that people will go back to the double pay up here, or is it just too expensive to have these two guys?
See, I think you can make it work, and I think you have to prioritize making it work. I played all 3 of these expensive guys and basically paid down at other positions last week. And if I would have got anything from my wide receivers, would have worked out really well. I think it's a big hole for people, to be completely honest, like falling into this running back value kind of trap that we had last week. Had these guys at 3,800. Yeah, they're going to touch the ball 15 times, but I mean, I've mentioned it pretty much on every show I've done over the past 6 weeks. It's just like the running back slot value, like it's from an opportunity cost perspective, is incredibly valuable. The way that the NFL is these days, like getting the running back volume with wide receiver target volume, these guys are all underpriced. So for me, playing a lot of small field single entry stuff, I really want to try and maximize that floor and ceiling with the least amount of dollars possible. And that's the running back position. I would much rather, like the other argument for that is these cheap running backs are much safer than the cheap wide receivers. But to be honest, I don't think that really matters. I think that you really have to try and pay up at the running back position as much as possible for these guys that are going to see insane usage, unless there's kind of an outlier in the mid range where you think he's just mispriced based on what his touches are going to be. So that's kind of where I'm at on that. I usually don't make it down to those really cheap guys like last week.
Well, we can find some mid-range guys that are in pretty good spots this week, but following the 2 $9,000 running backs, Leonard Fournette is up next. He's only $7,500. That does make him the 3rd most expensive back on this particular slate. It's a real rough slate because there's a lot of really high-scoring teams that just are in prime time or Saturday or whatever else. So Fournette, Connor may or may not play. I don't think that he's going to play, but there's a chance. David Johnson, Aaron Jones, Dalvin Cook, Tariq Cohen, and Joe Mixon. That's your $6,000 to $7,500 range. The only two really generating my interest here is I love Joe Mixon this week, and I think that's a really nice price at $6,100 based on his usage, his role in the passing game, the goal line work, and playing Oakland. That seems like a pretty decent spot for him. And Tariq Cohen, I can't really wrap my mind around it, but if you expect Green Bay to be competitive in this game, just a little bit on offense, it could be a big Cohen day.
Yeah, there's kind of a lot to unpack here. I agree with you on Mixon. I think he's going to be massively chalky at 6,100 against Oakland. So he has the highest touch projection that I'm looking at outside of Saquon and Zeke at 6,100. That is a guy that I think you can go to if you're paying down slightly from some of these elite usage guys. Pretty good spot against Oakland, obviously. They are a home favorite in this game. I am a little bit concerned because Driscoll hasn't thrown to his running backs a ton this year, but game sets up pretty well for plays against Oakland. Obviously, anytime you're facing this Oakland front, it's a really strong advantage for the running game and for the offensive line. So really like Mixon. Actually, I'm kind of interested in David Johnson, and I haven't played David Johnson much at all this year, but based on his price, 7,100, but the usage he's seeing in the passing game continues to kind of tick up. He had 10 targets last week, 8 receptions, only 11 yards on those 8 receptions, which is pretty incredible. But against this Atlanta team, 29th in DVOA at defending the running backs in the passing game, I think it's a decent spot to go back to DJ. He does have that ceiling. It's just always tough attacking a Cardinals player, right? Like this really low team total at 17.5 or so, what I'm looking at. They are a pretty big underdog in this game as well against Atlanta, which is interesting. But in Atlanta, again, in good game environment, that's something that I think is super important this time of the year when we are going to have some weather probably. I think David Johnson at 7,100 looks pretty interesting as well from a touch floor perspective.
I was really interested in David Johnson when the pricing first came out, and I really started honing in on him. Like, how can I make this work with paying up for one of the top end guys? And then I decided on Zeke. So how do I make Zeke and David Johnson work? And I couldn't really make it work all that well. And then I saw Mixon was $1,000 cheaper. So I think Mixon is the reason that I'm going to stay off of David Johnson. And if I had to use the pivot, I would roll the dice a little bit, either up a little bit to Tariq Cohen or down a little bit to James White.
Yeah, Tariq Cohen is kind of an interesting one. It is a pretty decent size run funnel situation against Green Bay. So I think that's interesting. Sets up well for plays. Again, like a guy that's probably going to touch the ball, I don't know, 15 times is what you're hoping for. At 6,300 isn't a direction that I normally go, especially with Joe Mixon right there at 61. I think you're on track for sure. Joe Mixon's going to be super chalky at that price.
I don't know. I feel like people don't use Mixon the way they're just disinterested with this entire Bengals team.
It could be. I mean, it's just kind of a gross game to look at in general, like Cincy versus Oakland. But sometimes these gross games can really shape up well for scoring. It's tough. Like that's the one that stands out to me. Like Joe Mixon's at the top of my model right now. Outside of these elite usage guys like Zeke and Barkley, might be tough to play all three. But if you end up playing one of Zeke and Barkley, I think getting to Mixon or David Johnson is going to be a priority for me as that second guy.
Well, below Joe Mixon in that $5,000 range into the 4,000s, the two guys that I'm looking at were two guys that everyone liked to use last week, and it kind of worked out. Jeff Wilson didn't work out at all because he only ended up with like 10 DraftKings points, but he's still in a pretty good spot here. The usage is going to be off the charts. Now, this assumes that Breida sits, and in terms of Jalen Samuels, it assumes that James Conner sits. But I think that Jalen Samuels is way underpriced here. I know that Ridley stole a touchdown from him, but they both had a carry each from inside the 5, and they both had 2 carries each from inside the 20-yard line. It's not like that Ridley was the exclusive goal line back. And in a game with such a high projected point total where they're going to have to pass, it seems like New England just might say, you know what, dink and dunk us to death. Go ahead. We're not going to give up a big play.
Yeah, Samuels is a super interesting one, right? Like if you think of him as more of a wide receiver, I think the volume makes a lot of sense. It's just tough to spend a slot like that for me. Like now he's not 3,800 anymore. I think it's a little bit different for me at 5,200. But again, like you mentioned, like it's a really strong spot, at least from a game flow perspective. It's a really high total there. I will say that Pittsburgh's been the highest pass volume team in the league over the past 3 weeks. So that definitely plays into the favor of Samuels, who's extremely active in the passing game. I think it's interesting. Like, yeah, you can make the same argument for Jeff Wilson again, as far as where his touch floor is, but just isn't a big factor in the passing game. So it's really tough for me to pull the trigger on one of those guys, especially with the way that DraftKings scoring is on a main team. But yeah, but just looking at kind of touch per dollar, point per dollar, anything you look at like that, these guys are going to be popping in both of those for sure.
So I like both those guys. I prefer Samuels, and he's not too expensive. He's $5,200. So if you went Zeke, Mixon, Samuels, you would still have enough money left over to pay up for another elite spot where you wanted to, and then pay down at receiver or tight end, whatever it may be, however you choose to construct your roster. But I think that it's going to be a popular build. Let's not pretend like it won't be. Sure. But I think it's a pretty decent one. Jeff Wilson, you can put into that mix. Chris Ivory, if LaShawn McCoy sits, is the other one. I don't have a ton of interest in him, but he's so cheap.
Yeah. So that's really, I mean, it's kind of the same thing as last week with something like that too, right? Like depending on what happens with that injury, like it's tough. Like the running quarterback always opens things up for the running back too. So I get it from that perspective. I just really struggle playing anyone against Detroit just because of what they do with ball control and really try and slow the game down. It's tough. Like it's going to be a really low total there. I'm with you though. I think the chalk construction is going to be playing one of Zeke and Barkley with Samuels. I think there'll be a lot of people that play both Zeke and Barkley with Samuels. I think that at 5,200, that's probably going to be the direction people go for somewhat a little bit more salary relief.
The problem is, in this shrunken slate, there's only 11 games on it. And again, a lot of the good teams are playing in primetime games. And like we would have had like Elijah McGuire potentially, who would come in super cheap on this slate, but he's just playing on Saturday, so he's off. We can't use him. Is there any like paid? All the guys we've mentioned so far are the volume players on this slate, and there's not a whole lot of other ones. Like Chris Carson's a volume player, but he does 0 in the passing game. So, like, what's his upside, really? He would need to rush for 2 touchdowns, and he's just not cheap enough to take that gamble. Is there any other running back you're really looking at?
Yeah. If you do want to pivot off of that mid-range, like that David Johnson Mixon range, there's still somewhat of an argument, I think, for Fournette. 7,500, he's probably too expensive, but if he touches the ball 24 times or so, it is a massive kind of discrepancy at the line of scrimmage against this Washington front that hasn't been very good. Pretty big run funnel situation. So if they end up leaning on Fournette a decent amount in this game, I think he's at least interesting as a home favorite. Not exactly a 0 in the passing game, though I don't expect him to touch the ball a ton. I think Fournette will draw some ownership for sure.
I don't know if he will, because I think people will find the money to either get up to one of the top 2 or get down to that Mixon range you were talking about. Like, I think that David Johnson will carry more ownership than Leonard Fournette just because of the price discount. Like, I'm good not playing any David Johnson, playing a little bit of Fournette if it came down to it.
Yeah, I think it's more of like a kind of a price pivot than anything. I definitely prefer Mixon and David Johnson. I'm just kind of trying to piece through which guys are still going to see touches at the top end. Like Dalvin Cook, like in Minnesota, like you mentioned him the last time we talked on this show. And I really struggle with that just because of how much Minnesota has passed in general. So 28th, kind of most run heavy team in the league over the last 3 weeks. Depends on what they do with the new offensive coordinator. But yeah, what are your thoughts on Dalvin Cook? I guess just looking at some of the guys that are going to touch the ball a lot, he could be one of them.
He is. Aaron Jones is another one that falls into that mix too. It's just I prefer the other guys around him so much more that I don't play enough lineups where he's ever going to find one.
Yeah, same. I mean, I'm pretty much locked into the guys we touched on at the start.
Is there anyone at the bottom, though, you can see perking up a little bit? Because everyone kind of clued into, and especially this week where there's no obvious options down at the bottom end unless an injury opens something up, that people are going to pay up for running backs this week. That's just, it's the only way you can really construct lineups and make them look good. Like if you tell yourself the story about your lineups, like, how do I win with this lineup? It's not going to be having Kenyon Drake in it. Now, you could play someone like Kenyon Drake if you think that, hey, they're going to be behind, they're going to have to pass, and maybe he'll get a fluke touchdown at the end of the game and save his week again. I don't know. But like Adrian Peterson's in there in a terrible matchup. Chris Thompson could be involved in the passing game as underdogs like he was last week, but still didn't do anything. Like, do you want any of these guys? Jordan Howard, I guess, against Green Bay, if he's, I mean, they leaned on him last week. If he gets the goal line touches, he could back his way into 2 touchdowns.
Yeah, and if he doesn't back his way into 2 touchdowns, you're completely buried just from giving up that running back slot. So I think that one guy that's actually not even on this list that for some reason is popping in my model is Tevin Coleman at 4,200. I mean, at home, like Tevin Coleman's not a guy I've played at all this year. But I mean, they're going to be ahead against Arizona. So I think at least at that price, he's at least interesting in tournaments. But again, like this isn't a position where I really take those kind of shots.
The problem with Tevin Coleman is the split with Judge Ito, and he's just been brutal all year. Even in good matchups, he gets like 11 touches.
Yeah, last week he had 10 rushing attempts, only 1 target in the passing game. That's pretty brutal. But that's probably why he's so cheap too. But yeah, I mean, he's always a guy that has pretty decent splits at home. I'm really just trying to scrape the bottom of the barrel here, and I really don't see a ton.
Marcus Murphy against Detroit.
Yeah, again, I don't go out of my way to play games or players in Detroit games just because of how much they slow the pace down.
Oh, we're eventually going to talk about, maybe we'll get to some of them right now. As a part of the wide receivers, if we go to the top, the Bills receivers are not near the top, but Adam Thielen is. He's $8,600. I don't love him in this matchup, but could this just be a week to junk? Because everyone's going to want to play Patriots receivers and Steelers receivers because that game is the highest projected on the slate by 6 points in terms of game total. That if there's a time to go back to Thielen, it's usually when people don't want him, and that's this week.
So 8,600 for Adam Thielen. Can you realistically do that when Zeke is 400 more? Like I personally cannot. But I do think that, I mean, from that perspective, like it's always a condensed target share in Minnesota. Like that's the main draw with Stephon Diggs and Adam Thielen. Like, you know exactly where the ball's going, just they don't have a lot of talent on offense outside of those guys. I think that Thielen's a little bit overpriced relative to opportunity cost for me. So it's not a play that I'm typically going to make. I think there's a couple other guys that are super interesting in that range. Like I think people go back to Julio. I think people might go to Devontae Adams. It's tough at the top. Like I understand the thought process and getting up to some of these guys. It's just the more and more kind of the way we progress through the season. Like if these guys are anywhere near the running back prices, I'm just not that interested.
Would you go Antonio Brown or Juju? Because I'll be on team Juju here. However, does Bill Belichick just say, hey, Juju's better than Antonio Brown now? Let's just try to take him out of the game.
It's possible. I mean, 8,500 for Antonio Brown. Again, not probably a play I'm going to make, but I mean, Pittsburgh, most pass happy team in the entire league over the past three, like I mentioned. Like this game just sets up so well for points that, I mean, it could be easily be an Antonio Brown week. I think he'll be relatively popular if you are going to pay up. I think that he's probably the guy that people will kind of be drawn towards. Juju at 8K. I mean, he's been the guy that's been making plays over the past couple of weeks. If you've been on the Juju train kind of in tournaments the past couple of weeks, it's really paid off for you, just massive upside. So we could be reaching that point where, I mean, we saw this with some of the other elite wide receivers that there came a point where like even Detroit, like people stopped kind of treating Golden Tate as their number one, started treating Marvin Jones as their number one. It's not near the same situation, but eventually these guys do drop off, and there's going to be a point where teams start paying more attention to Juju for sure.
I don't think that anyone will play Beckham in this matchup against Tennessee. And that's, granted he plays. I would expect him to come back this week. Is he a pivot option or is he still too expensive? Because like Julio's probably going to be in a pretty shitty situation with Patrick Peterson likely taking him out most of the game. You have Devontae Adams up against Chicago. That's not a great situation. Like for me, I know that T.Y. Hilton's not in a good spot, but I mean, T.Y. and Amare won me the monies last week. I might just go back to them again.
Oh, yeah. I think going back to T.Y., it makes a ton of sense. I think he'll be pretty chalky.
I don't think so, man. People look at that Dallas D and say, no thanks.
I don't know, man. At least the ownership that I'm looking at, they got him at 21 to 25%, which, I mean, it is early in the week. Obviously, we'll see how things progress. Anytime there's these big games, and now Indy's at home, like people really want to kind of play up that luck narrative, and T.Y. at home as well. Dallas has been legit. I'm with you. If we're just looking at some of the volume type metrics, like T.Y. Hilton, fifth highest Whopper on the slate over the past 3 weeks. So he's right there with Antonio Brown, with Devontae Adams, Julio Jones. Like I think that his usage is still probably better than 6,800 type wide receiver.
Would you go back to Amari Cooper? Because I feel like Amari Cooper is going to be the one that draws all the attention there in terms of ownership.
Man, I think the last time I came on was the week after Amari was either chalk or was Amari chalk. We can't remember. So like anytime he comes off a big game, people jump back on that train and just get buried. So at 7,500, I'm probably not going to be there for that one. But I understand it. Like this Dallas and Indy game, I think people are going to want to go back to Cooper for sure.
Edelman or Gordon? I would take Edelman.
Yeah, I always feel a little bit more confident on his usage for sure. I mean, it is a pretty decent size pass funnel too. So I am somewhat interested on the New England side of the passing game. I'm just not sure exactly the direction I want to go on that quite yet. But yeah, Edelman, I think you can pretty easily project him for like 5 receptions or so. He is one of the guys that's popping in the top of my model as well. It's just it's tough to like kind of justify some of these guys that are priced in this range. Like Edelman at 7,200, it's really tough for me to play him, I think, over a guy like T.Y. for 400 less.
If Doug Baldwin ends up going, I don't hate Tyler Lockett at 6,200 because you're just playing for big play. I would never use him in a cash game, but in terms of GPPs, he has that big play upside. This whole $5,000 range, I don't really know how to approach it. I don't love anyone really. Like Calvin Ridley at 5,000 might be the one that I end up going to if I play under the assumption that Patrick Peterson locks down Julio, or at least is shadowing him or on him for over 50% of the snaps. Those are usually the games when Calvin Ridley can exploit the other side of the field and go nuts. Now, it doesn't happen all that often, but this does seem like the type of game for it to happen.
Yeah, wide receiver is interesting in this range for sure. Like, I think that there's a chance that people go to Allen Robinson at 5,500, kind of in that range. But yes, I mean, you mentioned the Peterson type effect. I don't know if it was last year or the year before. Everyone basically was just playing the number two wide receivers against Arizona and just printing. So from that perspective, it makes sense. Sanu, I mean, he's still going to take up a decent amount of that target share in the slot. So Sanu, I mean, he has 4,600 in this matchup. He's probably going to avoid Peterson. Had 8 targets last week. So, I mean, I think he's always kind of the safer PPR play than Ridley. Ridley is a guy that you could probably go to in tournaments, like you said.
Yeah, I have no real interest in Sanu in tournaments only because Ridley is there, that he only needs his 5 targets to turn that into 150 yards and 2 touchdowns. Could be a 0.
For sure.
Obviously, there's no safety with Calvin Ridley, but I do like the upside that he presents. What about the Tampa guys? You got Evans, who's probably a bit too high priced for this matchup against Baltimore, but Tampa Bay's defense on the road has just been absolutely atrocious all year, and it puts them into just very positive passing situations. Everyone was burned by Chris Godwin last week. Could he be a sneaky guy to go back to here?
Yeah, looking at a game, I mean, easily, I mean, top 3 most inefficient games of the entire year. 10 targets, only 1 catch. So, I mean, if the process led you last week to Godwin, got 10 targets out of that, I wouldn't expect efficiency to necessarily go up against Baltimore is the problem. So 4,900, I think he's totally fine relative to kind of what his target share has been, but I definitely don't think it's safe. I'm not going out of my way to target this Baltimore team for sure. It's tough because this Tampa Bay Baltimore game shapes up so well for plays that I am interested in it. I'm just trying to figure out what pieces make the most sense. I don't know. I think that both of these guys, like, it's similar to what they have been, but it's just a much tougher matchup.
Well, I guess Baltimore is weak against tight ends. You could play Cameron Brate potentially, or just focus on Adam Humphries, who's really just running a lot of the same routes that O.J. Howard ran earlier in the season. Those are such easy completions for Jameis Winston that I think that he could do it.
Yeah, 5,100. He's getting to the point though where, like, so 5,100, do you want to go there, or do you want to kind of try and find salary elsewhere to get up to this other tier? Like, these guys aren't as cheap as they were before. Like 2 or 3 weeks ago, we just jammed both these guys in at 4,200, 4,500. It made a little bit more sense to me, but like paying for that kind of upside that Humphreys has, which I think is pretty low at 5,100, I think that there's better ways to spend salary.
So paying below $5,000, which you're probably going to need to do if you want to get up to those running backs. I like D.D. Westbrook at his price. I'm always just a fan of D.D. Westbrook. You got the Bear Killer, Randall Cobb down there. Always plays well in these intra-division games. Then you got like Robert Foster at $4,300. I would expect Darius Slay to be on Zay Jones. So you have either Robert Foster or Isaiah McKenzie. I know you don't like playing people against the Lions, but these guys are cheap, and they both possess huge upside because of their speed.
Yeah, I actually think that Foster's interesting. So, like, if you want to pay all the way down for one of these guys and get them in this kind of poor game situation, I think that still makes a decent amount of sense. What about Kenny Stills at 4,300? He's a guy that is definitely kind of popping in like the weighted opportunity type metrics, like 4,300 for a guy with a 0.74 Whopper. That's top 4 on the slate over the past 3 weeks. They are in Minnesota, so not a great spot, obviously. But I mean, this guy's been seeing a ton of usage. 9 targets last week, 135 yards and a touchdown, 8 catches. Does that feel chasey to you? I'm interested for sure.
It's only chasey to me because I know people will be on him based on what they saw last week in the production that he put up. I always feel like it's never a good time, a lot like the Amari Cooper situation, to go back to Stills, even with the price discount, a week after he comes off a huge week.
Yeah, I mean, I get it from that perspective for sure. Just 4,300, that was a price that stood out. I think Dede is interesting for sure. At 4,500, I mean, this Jacksonville team doesn't throw a ton, but this Washington-Jacksonville game sets up relatively well for plays on that side of the ball. Kind of a higher ADOT type guy, so hopefully he can get over the top for a couple of big plays.
I got no one really else from down below. And this is where the Millionaire Maker was won last week. It was Deshaun Hamilton and Robert Foster, 3,000 and 3,300 at receiver. Like, do you see anyone with that sort of go off potential in the $3,000 range?
Yeah, I don't know if in the $3,000 range there's really much else. Like, same argument you have for Dede, you could probably say the same thing about Dante Moncrief at 3,700, but I don't know. It's tough. Bruce Ellington, pretty low ceiling on him, but a guy that's still seeing a decent target share for Detroit. if you go up a little bit, Dante Pettis at 4,400, like he's at least shown multi-touchdown upside. So I think if you do have the extra salary to get to him, 7 targets in 3 straight games, does have a 100-yard game in there as well. So obviously that came on a 75-yard play, but yeah, I think he at least has a decent amount of upside. Again, hopefully something opens up throughout the week that allows us to get to these elite running backs, because I'm with you, man. Like the value does not seem great so far.
Well, Bruce Ellington may or may not play this week. I guess that could open up more value for Theo Riddick, like we saw the last time they were sans slot receiver. But the guys that I'd be looking at, Isaiah McKenzie is one. John Ross is another, just based on playing Oakland, that if you can get behind them, could be a good spot for him. And they've been using him a little bit more, at least in high leverage targets, over some of their other players. And the final one, where is he here? I had him highlighted. Oh, yeah, Michael Gallup. He's always open. Eventually, Dak's going to hit him.
3,600. So like that's what I mean. Like if you really want to get down, like so all these guys are pretty thin. At least do it to a point where it really changes your roster construction. So last week, like the play to do that was instead of playing Sutton, maybe you move down and you play Hamilton because he's 3K. Like that makes a big difference relative to playing a 4,900 guy like these Tampa Bay guys for your roster. So yeah, I don't have any issues with Gallup. Especially since Zeke's going to be super popular. Amari's going to draw some ownership. Just take the cheapest guy, 3,600. I mean, his target share has been, I mean, just okay. But I mean, he's top 10 in Whopper at 3,600. I think he's super interesting.
What do we do at quarterback? Because Russell Wilson is the highest price, and you're just banking on efficiency and maybe some yardage with his legs from that perspective. But like you have him at 67, Ben, Luck, Cousins, Ryan, Trubisky. That's your $6,000 range. You got Brady below. Josh Allen's 58. Marcus Mariota's down at, what is he at now? 5,100. Driscoll's not bad. He's 5,100. Like, I have no idea what to do. This might actually be the first week I play Lamar Jackson.
Yeah, the first thing I always do at quarterback is I kind of allocate a bunch of different offensive line versus defensive line metrics into like a basic score, just because that's the thing that affects quarterback more than anything is if they're going to see pressure, if they're not going to see pressure. So I'm looking at that. I'm looking at pace. One of the guys that stands out to me, you said it, Lamar Jackson at 5,900, his price hasn't really moved a ton. Just the floor you get from a guy that you can like pretty confidently project for 60 rushing yards. I mean, they do have a high team total in this one, highest pace, highest plays. Like it sets up really well against Tampa Bay, who's been defense to a target all year for quarterbacks. So I think he's the guy I'm looking at. It's tough because you can't really pair him with anyone. Driscoll, I mean, the quarterback that plays Oakland stands out to me pretty much every week just because Oakland can't pressure. So I think that Driscoll is actually interesting at 5,100. Like, again, like that does a lot to your roster. If you do pay all the way down, maybe you pair him with a guy like Joe Mixon and try and capture all the touchdowns in that game against Oakland, who's going to give up points. The guy all the way at the top, I mean, Ben Roethlisberger, most pass-happy team in the league against New England. Like their offensive line's been so good. I think he's going to have plenty of time. I think you can pretty accurately project him for at least top 3 in pass attempts, even though efficiency is really what we want to target at quarterback. So yeah, I think Ben's fine.
What about the guys in bad spots? Someone like Aaron Rodgers, for example. He comes in at probably the lowest price you'll ever see him at. He already played a good game against Chicago earlier this year, and he only did it in like 2 quarters. I always find it interesting in weeks like this to target either the high-end receivers who have perceived bad matchups or the quarterbacks who have perceived bad matchups. But you're getting Aaron Rodgers as a 6-point dog at the cheapest price you're ever going to find him.
5,700 for Rodgers. Yeah, I mean, it's tough. Like the one thing that I will say about Rodgers is at least we got probably more rushing upside than we've seen for quite some time last week. But that said, talking about at the line of scrimmage, bottom 4 matchup at the line of scrimmage for Green Bay. To be completely honest, this was surprising to me looking at it. Aaron Rodgers has not been very good under pressure this year, almost 3 yards per attempt less under pressure this year from an efficiency standpoint. So on the road, like low total, like I understand why his price is there. I think that people are going to maybe go to him at that price. I don't know. I'm not really there yet. It's not really connecting the dots for me as what I typically look for.
So for me, on my short list of quarterbacks that I want to play this week, Lamar and Josh Allen are near the top because of their price. I really like Mitch Trubisky at his price. Maybe just say, you know what, this isn't a game where the running backs find the end zone, which means Trubisky is going to be involved in every sort of score possible in this game. I don't mind Dak, but even on the other side, I don't think that a lot of people will go back to Luck here, because the last time he played a really good defense 2 weeks ago, he was shut out. And no one went back to him last week, and they really should have. And it's not like Houston doesn't generate pressure, has a good defense. They do. Luck was able to pick him apart. I think he can do that against Dallas.
Luck is a guy that he's like one of my biggest regrets. And I think a lot of people feel this way this season, just haven't played enough Andrew Luck. Like he's in, I mean, it's not the best spot, but he is at home. Like this line has played so well that I mentioned it before. I think he's going to have time. They're a very pass happy team. Like pairing him with TY, like going back to that well, I don't think it's terrible. I mean, they are a home favorite again, like just targeting those really good situations. He's not an absolute zero from rushing attempts or rushing yards. So yeah, I think Luck's interesting. 6,400. It's going to be tough unless we get some value to open up. I'm more on the range that you mentioned with some of these other running quarterbacks like Josh Allen and Lamar Jackson. Yeah, by the way, go ahead and take your victory lap on Josh Allen. I've totally missed out on that the last couple of weeks. So it feels kind of bad to go to that after I haven't been on it at all. But I'm with you.
It feels like it's going to end very abruptly sometime soon, but I just kind of want to ride the wave until it finishes.
Yeah, I mean, it's tough. Like, I think that's a big leak in my game at times. Is like I get too caught up in these like really low totals and bad game situations. But this guy, like his rushing upside and his price, like should have been in play at least for a lot of these weeks. So definitely have some regrets there.
Brady or Roethlisberger? Which one would you go to?
I prefer Roethlisberger at home for sure, just because I don't think he's going to see any pressure whatsoever. It is tougher because his weapons are a lot more expensive unless you roll out Samuels with him. I think if Pittsburgh's in a really good spot here. New England really needs this game, though, at the same time after what happened to them against Miami last week. So I think I prefer Roethlisberger. Haven't played a ton of Tom Brady this year, but I think both of those guys are going to be at least relatively popular because people are going to want to attack this game.
Last one, and if we're looking for value, we might be able to get it. If we're going to talk about guys like Lamar Jackson or Mitch Trubisky or Josh Allen based on what they bring to the table as a part of their legs, Josh Johnson's only $4,300.
Ooh, that's a tough one for me. Maybe this will be the one that I just have complete blinders for. But I mean,
I don't love it. It's a terrible situation for him. But what if they get down by a ton? All of a sudden, he's breaking off 80-yard runs.
I'm just trying to see if there's anyone else down here that's playable. Yeah, I mean, Driscoll's 5,100. I was going to say him, but it's a big price difference between Driscoll and Cody Kessler, Josh Johnson. Yeah, I can't. Realistically, I can't play a guy with a team total this low. He's been terrible under pressure. I can't do it. Okay,
let's move to tight end. What do you got here? Are you going to pay up for Kittle the week after he goes for 200 yards and 1/2?
So tight end, just from like a macro perspective, I do think it makes a lot of sense to kind of use the barbell approach and either pay up for these elite guys like Kittle and Kelsey, like all those guys. We don't have a lot of these guys on the slate that we normally have. We do have Eric Ebron that's still there, 5,900. Gronk's price went up after last week, 5,800. So yeah, I think that people are somewhat conditioned now to pay up for these guys who, if they're seeing volume like a wide receiver, these prices are probably closer to 7K. So you get a little bit of a discount attacking this Kittle, Gronk, Ebron range with a pretty high touchdown expectation. So between those guys, like it's tough. I think that at the top end, probably prefer Kittle just because of the upside that he carries. Like most routes per run on the slate, most yards per routes run outside of Evan Ingram last week in a small sample. So highest Whopper by far. So yeah, I'm on Kittle for sure.
I think that if you're going to pay down, you have your choice between one of two guys, and it's not pretty. You can pay down for Cameron Brate at $4,000 because Baltimore, like I mentioned, not the greatest against tight ends, or you bite the bullet and play the guy who's playing the worst team against tight ends, CJ Uzomah against the Raiders.
Yeah, I actually don't mind the Uzomah play, to be completely honest. Like it sets up well for plays in that game. Like I mentioned, like he's another guy that's running a ton of routes. One thing that I do think is interesting about Uzomah is that Driscoll's thrown to the tight end a decent amount. 20% of his throws over the past year have been to the tight end. That's well above average. Like just from kind of a different perspective, like Andrew Luck is 26.8% of his passes have gone to the tight end position. And we always think of him as a guy that peppers his tight end. So Driscoll's not scared to throw to Uzomah. I think it's interesting at 3,600, especially in this matchup. Like at tight end, I don't put a ton of weight into matchup unless it's the tails, right? So we're looking at Oakland, we're looking at Pittsburgh, we're looking at Tampa Bay. Those are the teams that give up a ton.
So the other two potential pay down options, one is Kyle Rudolph because rule of thumb, just play tight ends against Miami, tends to work out. The other one is with all these injuries in Tennessee, and almost a rule of thumb too, just play tight ends against the Giants, tends to work out a lot of the time. You got Anthony Ferkster at $2,900. He's the cheapest one I can find that I don't hate.
Yeah, I always am drawn a little bit towards Ricky Seals-Jones just because he does run a lot of routes,
so
but 2,600. Yeah, he hasn't done anything. Like anytime you play these guys, you do have a pretty reasonable expectation to take a 0. But I mean, he had 5 targets last week, so I think he's at least in that. I don't think he's any worse than a fixer. Let's say that. So I mean, it's tough getting down there. I do like my tiebreaker is always trying to find a team that has like a higher team total, just because touchdowns are so important at tight end. It's tough. Like last week, I thought we had a pretty clear value at Ian Thomas at 2,700. There's not that guy that like really stands out to me right now. Kyle Rudolph, I mean, at 3,500, he's probably the guy, but I'm probably going to play Uzoma in that range anyway. Ferkster is interesting. It's just a low total. So that's the only thing I can poke a hole in it, I guess.
Yeah, the other low total guy is Vernon Davis at 3,200. If Jordan Reed misses the game, Johnson didn't mind at least throwing to him last week. But if you had to pick between the top 3 guys, between Kittle, Gronk, and Eric Ebron, which one would it be? Because I think I'm going to lean with the guy who's going to be the lowest owned, and it's Ebron.
Yeah, that's exactly who I was going to say because, again, like going back to the Indy at home, like condensed target share, we talk about Minnesota all the time for that. But Indy, it's basically T.Y. Hilton and Eric Ebron, for me at least, of guys that are interesting. Ebron's just going to continue to score touchdowns every week at a position where touchdowns really matter. I think it's fine. Like 8 targets, 16 the week before, 7 the week before that. Like if I'm trying to like get the old Eric Ebron out of my head still, just because we haven't really seen him completely fail in a spot that's a decent spot yet this year. Not that this is as good as some of the other ones he's had recently, but yeah, I think Ebron's going to carry the lowest ownership for a really pass-happy team with a decent team total. So yeah, I think that Ebron slightly over Kittle for me.
At defense, to close this off, is there any one in particular that jumps out to you? Because I kind of like the Falcons against the Cardinals.
Yeah, so that's always kind of interesting because Josh Rosen takes a ton of sacks, throws a lot of picks, kind of a neutral matchup at the line of scrimmage just because Atlanta doesn't pressure a ton. So just looking at like, it seems really gross to do this just because of, they've been one of the worst teams in the entire league this year on defense, but Cincinnati all the way down to 2,500 against Oakland, like Derek Carr is going to have to throw. I expect them to be behind in this game. The pace is great. At the line of scrimmage, Oakland's one of the worst teams at protecting. It's probably thin. I just wish there was a really cheap one that stood out to me. There's really not at this moment. I think Green Bay against Chicago, but there's not going to be a ton of pass attempts in that game. It's not a week where we have like a clear top option, at least for me right now, at the super low end. I think 2,500 for Cincinnati is the lowest I've looked so far.
The two that I don't hate from below that is one is Dallas, only because they're going to be facing so much volume against Andrew Luck. I've talked about how I like Andrew Luck, but that could go very poorly, very quickly, especially with that pass rush and defense that Dallas can bring. The other one is just Washington at $2,400 against Jacksonville. Like stream against Jacksonville, that's not a bad idea.
Yeah, for sure. I think that, anytime you can attack Cody Kessler, he takes a ton of sacks. So Washington has been pressuring relatively well, 2,400. If you're just targeting pass attempts in general, like Pittsburgh's price at 2,400, like never really trying to attack Tom Brady, but a lot of pass attempts in a game. Like I think that it's always interesting to attack these games where we think there's going to be a lot of points scored. Like we like the game environment for offense. That just means that it's going to shape up really well for passing usually. So Pittsburgh's discount all the way down to 2,400. They've been so aggressive this year that I think they're at least in play for looking at some of those teams down there.
I guess it depends on if I need the salary cap relief or not, if I get down to the Falcons. But overall, just feel like Jacksonville and Baltimore are the two that you should use if you have the money for it.
Yeah, Baltimore is probably the highest expectation play for sure. I mean, you could make it probably make an argument for Buffalo in that range too. I think those would be the two most popular defenses. Baltimore at 3K. Um, yeah, I mean, it shapes up pretty well at the line of scrimmage. Top 5 matchup against Tampa Bay, who just doesn't protect very well. Jameis will take sacks. So Baltimore, I think, if you're paying all the way up, makes a lot of sense.
Finally, let's close this with stacks. We keep talking about this Pittsburgh and New England game. The over-under right now for it is 52.5. The next closest game on the slate is 47 in Dallas and Indy. Like, that's a substantial difference. It's actually only 5.5 points of difference now. It was 6 earlier. That one game has bumped up a little bit, but is this where everyone is going to be jumping to get in? And is there a sneaky shootout game here? Because there's a lot of really low totals on this slate. And even someone like the Bills and the Jets are teams that constantly have low totals, but like the Jets are super high in pace. I know they're not on the slate, but betting the over on them has actually been a pretty smart move over the past 8 weeks or so. And like some of these lower end teams, you can find some value here because a lot of the overs keep going under and a lot of the unders keep going over.
Yeah, it's crazy as far as like the actual stack sort of things. Like I guess maybe I assumed that Indy would be a little bit more popular than they're going to be. So I think going with like a Luck TY Ebron stack is something I think super interesting. If people think this Dallas defense is suddenly super elite, I definitely think that Indy could still have a good game, put up some points at home for sure.
Okay, so would you bring that back with Zeke or Cooper, do you think?
Probably Zeke, just because I always feel a little bit more comfortable in that side of the ball. Like, yeah, you can even play it from that side if you think that they're going to be way ahead. Hopefully Zeke touches the ball a little bit more, and then you kind of have some catch-up mode for Luck on the other side of the ball.
We've talked a lot about the Bengals, which is terrifying. That over-under is actually 46. It's still one of the highest on this slate that maybe you don't use Driscoll, but there are pieces in that game. Like we like Mixon, we like Uzama. I mean, I don't hate Tyler Boyd. John Ross could be a sleeper. Is that a game to target? Maybe just a Driscoll Cincinnati stack?
I actually don't hate Driscoll because at least he's not a zero as far as like his upside on the ground too. Like he was a pretty good athlete in college at 5,100. That does so much for your roster. You start with Jeff Driscoll and go through Zoma and Mixon. You can do a lot with the rest of your team. You can definitely get in at least one of those other running back studs. So that's always what I'm kind of trying to do at kind of when I'm stacking is at least get a kind of unique correlation, but one that allows me to get a lot of savings. That makes me kind of easy. It makes it easier to get up to some of these studs that we want to jam in.
I guess the only other one is going to be Tampa Bay. Just because their offense can be very concentrated if you don't use Mike Evans, because he doesn't seem to do anything anymore, that if you use Jameis, Godwin, and Humphreys, or potentially Brate instead of one of those guys, no one's going to be targeting that side of the ball for Tampa Bay whatsoever. It's just going to be Lamar Jackson, Baltimore defense, be on your way. But we've seen Baltimore's defense look bad at times this year, and why not the team that just throws a ton could do this?
Yeah, I've been struggling with the Tampa Bay play all year because it's so spread out, kind of what they like to do on offense. Like it made a lot more sense to me when Humphreys and Godwin were cheaper than they are now. And then, yeah, going out of your way to target this Baltimore defense seems bad. I get that they've still allowed some points. Not a train I'm probably going to be on, but you'll get low ownership for sure.
All right, Joe Holka. Check him out on Twitch at twitch.tv/Joe Holka and on Twitter and YouTube at /Joe Holka. Let everyone know what your streaming schedule is like for the rest of the week and the rest of the year.
Yeah, so do a Sunday morning show with Peter Jennings, aka CSU Ram. That starts at 9 Eastern time on Sunday mornings. Those have been a lot of fun. I review my team every Tuesday night at 9 Eastern time in the 1500 on DraftKings. So go through a bunch of the higher stake teams on that, and then have a bunch of NHL and kind of other betting streams throughout the week that are normally right before lock. So definitely check those out on Twitch.
You can find me on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook at the PME. The cheat sheet and updated rankings will be in the description of this pod or vid and up on DKPlaybook.com. Don't forget to smash the like button, leave your DraftKings handle, and tell me which quarterback you think is the best price per dollar value of the week on the main slate for the Millionaire Maker in Week 15 on DraftKings. And please go vote FSTA.org/vote video. You can find the link in the description and comment section as well, and vote for for the Pat Mayo experience. Then tomorrow, go back and do the same thing. Do it every day until voting closes, which I assume is soon. I have no idea, actually. But anyway, that would help out the Pat Mayo experience a lot. Try to get a foothold in the whole video world of fantasy. We try to do a good job for everyone out there, so I so rarely ask for stuff to come back. This would be one where it'd be greatly appreciated. So thank you all for watching. Go win some bucks in week 15. I'll see you next time.
Pat Mayo experience! Experience!